Hello, welcome back to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. I am recording today's intro to this episode from my new office in my new home. And wow, what a grounding, beautiful environment to be joining you from today. And I'm feeling super grateful. Today on the show, we're diving into a topic that I have recently been learning a lot more about. It's been coming up a lot more in coaching, and it's been really interesting to learn how to support clients who are neurodivergent or who have ADHD. And our guest today is an expert in both of those topics. And by way of introducing her and this conversation, I wanted to share a little anecdote because I think it really lands on what the heart of today's conversation is about. So recently, I hosted or co-hosted my second Unbounded Mastermind retreat out in Western Massachusetts in the Berkshires. And it was an amazing long weekend with, just members that I've been in relationship with for years and years. And it was such a heart-filled experience and time together. And something I noticed is that several of the participants kept interrupting me and one another all weekend. And as a coach, that is something that I was trained never to do, to really listen fully to what my clients have to say and not interrupt their thought process until they had finished. And that's something that I've always also held in my repertoire as a mastermind facilitator, as a retreat facilitator, as a community event organizer, just creating this agreement around not interrupting, around really allowing one another to share fully. And I was having this kind of reaction in the moment during the retreat where I was getting annoyed. I was getting irritated because the members, 3 of them, they kept interrupting me. And I was trying to, put my thoughts into words and say everything I needed to say. And then I was like, I adore these women. Like, why am I getting annoyed? And then I had this aha moment. I realized that they actually all have ADHD. And that's a characteristic of ADHD, that you feel this need to kind of just say what you need to say in the moment while the thought is still front and center. And I actually shared that. I was like, wow, I notice I'm getting irritated with you all because you guys keep interrupting me. And then it hit me that you all have ADHD. This is just what you do. This is how you communicate. And we all had an amazing laugh about it. And there was just so much normalization and so much more permission giving in that moment of just embracing one another for who we are, how we operate, and how we communicate. And something I really appreciate about today's conversation with my guest is that those who have neurodivergence, and especially ADHD, just communicate differently. And as coaches, it falls on us to really adapt our own coaching style and facilitation style to the needs and the communication patterns of our clients and the folks that we work with. So you are in for such a treat today because I am delighted to have Regina Carey join me on the podcast today. She is an expert in both of these topics, and she is also just like a ball of joy and energy. The episode wasn't recorded on video, but if you had been watching our conversation, she would keep pausing to write notes on her big whiteboard behind her. And she's very dynamic and interactive. And you can tell that she has a background in teaching because she came alive and was so embodied during our conversation. Regina and I connected gosh, I think we just connected on LinkedIn, and I think she may have reached out and we just created this natural connection. She has a background in having family in the Massachusetts area, and she currently lives in Michigan, where my husband is from. And, as we do as empaths, we just naturally connected. And I'm really fortunate to have her join us today. So a little bit more about Regina. Regina Carey has spent the last 3 decades educating, empowering, and advocating for those who feel stuck, yet long to take that next great leap. She's been described as a natural dose of an antidepressant, which I could not agree more with, for people with the ability to inspire her clients into action within the first few minutes of meeting with them. She works with individuals, teams, and communities, reminding them of their innate wisdom, power, and brilliance. She's an acclaimed speaker and passion instigator who lights a fire in the hearts of her audience. We dive into topics today about how recognizing that your energy is everything, and that's made the biggest difference for Regina in learning how to thrive. We explore the idea of micro recoveries and what they are, and why they're actually better than self-care, and how they can help you stay in positive, balanced energy, especially if you are neurodivergent or have ADHD. We dig into the connection between neurodivergence, empathy, high sensitivity, and entrepreneurship, and how you as a coach, friend, or partner can support. It is such a fascinating conversation and really jam-packed with new insights and information for me that I really appreciate as a coach who's committed to continually growing her craft. I think you will as well. If you're looking for an opportunity or an excuse to join me in person, virtually, one final time before I take a break for maternity leave, come join us for our final non-networking power hour before we take a break for the fall months. The next and final one is coming up on Monday, August 5th at 12 noon Eastern Time. We'll drop the link in the show notes. And if you want to join our online community, where I know that for me, I'm spending a lot more time and engagement these days, you can join us for free by following the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less, through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Regina, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
I was thinking that when we first connected, I think last winter, you were sharing that you were looking forward to going to Machu Picchu later this spring, which is on my bucket list, a place I was supposed to go to at the beginning of the pandemic, lead a retreat there, and then kind of our plans got redirected. So I'm excited to kind of hear a little bit about your experience on our episode today. And by way of getting us started, I'd love to invite you to share your pronouns and a little bit of your story, because I know we're going to dive into your story today. And I think our stories are really what share with the world about who we are.
Very good. Thank you. My pronouns are she, her. And, it's always a little Well, entertaining. I laugh inside when I think about sharing my story. It's sort of the same feeling I used to get when people would say, well, what do you do at networking events? Least favorite question ever. And, I have always been a teacher. And my story really starts as growing up on a farm in a tiny little town in northwestern Ohio. And I would spend my entire day outside, immersed in nature, observing things, sitting in my apple tree and daydreaming. And I think from a very young age, I was always tuned in to the energy of the world. And I had the space and the peace and the quiet to do that. And then, we grow up. And I always thought that I was going to be a teacher who had her classroom for 30 years with my name on the door. And then I would retire and that would be my life story. But as a special ed teacher, I lived that timeline, the professional timeline of a special educator. It was 3.5 years. And the funny thing, I did that almost to the date. But it's because I had an opportunity to go after my master's and a master's at UNC Chapel Hill that was paid for. How could I turn that down? And so from that moment on, when I said yes to that opportunity, my career and life really have looked like the family circus. Those of you who are old enough to remember the family circus, when mom would ask Billy to go out and buy a loaf of bread and he'd go to the park and he'd go visit a friend and he'd watch the animals and he'd observe a caterpillar. And so I've had amazing opportunities across my career to reinvent myself, to start over. And I have faced just about everything that a person can face in a lifetime: birth, death, cancer, addiction, not personally, but in my family. And it has helped me increase my compassion for others as well as for myself, because that's really the only way we can do it in the world, is to practice it on ourselves. And I knew one day when I was out running and I heard the question, what do you do? I ran with that. And the answer came to me, it doesn't matter what you do. What matters is who is in front of you, who they are, is what I really heard. And so I got the word Ubuntu tattooed on my wrist, my left wrist, to remind me that my work is about the person in front of me. And that's how I've been moving forward ever since.
Wow, that's really touching. I just, as I'm sitting here listening to you enthralled, something that I'm so appreciating is, I've had a lot of educators on the show over the last, year and a half since we launched the podcast.
Mhm.
And the teachers and educators that I've had on the show are always the best storytellers.
Ah,
And have you noticed that? I'm curious your opinion on that.
I believe that it's because somebody gave that compliment to me just recently, that I was a great storyteller. And I thought, I don't even think about it, but when you're an educator, you're selling information, you're selling ideas and learning. And if you cannot captivate your audience, it's pointless. You're losing money. You're losing out on, losing money, tongue in cheek. But the truth is, the only way that we can help others is by sharing something of ourselves so that there's a connector. And I always do this sort of linking motion with my hands. I'm very gesticulate, which doesn't help our audience very much. But if you take your index fingers, left and right, and hook them together, this is what has got to happen to have learning take place. There's got to be something where you say, yeah, I get it. Or, oh, I love that. Or, I know that feeling that you're describing right now. And when you can create a hook for them, you've got them.
Mm. Wow, that's cool. I think that's really going to resonate with me. And I know, we're going to chat about how empaths can really take care of their own needs to serve, and particularly serve the person in front of them more deeply. And I have it that it's really connected with what you just said, that I think our ability to um, hook the person over there starts with taking care of ourselves over here, which I think is a lot of what your Machu Picchu trip represented for you. And I wanted to jump into the conversation there. And I know we're going to talk about empathy and energy and neurodivergence, which I'm so excited to dig into with you. But you shared something before we started recording that I think just really stood out for me, because I think that as empaths, the ways in which we take care of ourselves and set ourselves up to thrive are really different.
Yeah.
And they vary. And sometimes we can just kind of roll our eyes at these hot button topics and words like self care and morning routine and morning ritual, and they don't really land because they're not unique to us and to our nervous systems and to really what helps us to thrive. And so I'd love to stay. My watch is talking to me. um, that's funny. I would love to start our episode today with where I typically end every conversation, and invite you to share what truly makes the difference for you in thriving as a prosperous empath.
Mm. I realized when I saw this question, because nobody's ever asked me that question. And it's that, I am able, when someone's in front of me and they're telling me about themselves or what they're struggling with, I can feel it. I feel it in my body. I recognize when someone is struggling with a gut issue or a migraine, or like when I'm talking with you, I feel a lot of tension in my shoulders, right? Because you're having to do a lot with your body these days. And I feel that tension in my back, in the upper shoulders. I feel what you feel. And I have learned, especially as a special education teacher, to stop that urge to go into the emotion with you. I have had to hold it together for a lot of people in my life. And so I've learned to compartmentalize my emotions. And I often use this gesture of taking the emotion that's rising in my throat and I push it down. I move it back. I put it off my body somehow, but not now is often what I feel. Like this is right now, I have to be in showing up for this person in a different way and see what kind of downloads I get. And so what I recognized is after a while, everything is energy. And so that energy has to go somewhere. And it would show up as anxiety. It would show up as insomnia. It would show up as dis-ease. And the first time I recognized it was after my daughter went through addiction. At the same time, my husband was going through cancer. And I said, I've got to do something with my body to move these emotions through me. And so I walked a portion of the Camino de Santiago. Now that's a 500-mile trek, and I went 200 miles of that. But all I had to do was walk. That was my one job. And that's a lot to put your body through every single day for 2 weeks. I walked 6, 7, 8 hours a day in Spain.
Wow.
So when I was through with that physical exhaustion, the time alone to be in a space to feel the emotions, to cry, to yell, to talk with other people and tell them what I had experienced. And so Machu Picchu was the same. I was gone for 2 weeks and I walked up and down many mountains, but Machu Picchu was 4 days of the most intensive climbing I had ever done. In the light, in the dark, in the dry, in the rain, excruciating pain, but my body was so strong. I was healthy and strong the whole time, which was a gift because I'm 55. I'm not a spring chicken, but I feel like a spring chicken. You have to understand, for all of you out there listening, and I think you probably can identify, I wake up feeling like I'm 16 every day. That's my young spirit. And that's why I am passionate about the work I do, because I love it. But I also know that these extreme adventures have to be a part of the way I live my life in order to balance out the extreme emotion.
I so appreciate that. I completely resonate with those sentiments. And the same is true for me. And it reminds me of an episode we recorded earlier this year with Philippa Robinson, who's a highly sensitive coach. And she is the one who introduced me to the term high sensation seeking.
Ah, yes.
And it really stuck for me, that being a high sensation seeker, and in a healthy way, right? Like taking on these extreme physical endeavors. You know, I did cold water swimming all throughout the winter, pregnant, and it was so nourishing for my nervous system, and it really quieted the emotions and the the anxiety in my body and the dis-ease, as you mentioned, which I honestly don't experience often these days in life. But yeah, but it sounded like that struck a chord for you. What were you going to say about that?
Well, and when you said being in the cold water, I did, one of my extreme things was I did a polar plunge, and I despise the cold. I am warm weather, like Michigan.
You live in Michigan.
I know Michigan is getting ready to have 90-degree temperatures all week, and I am thrilled. I can't wait. And I know I often say, what am I doing in Michigan? And that's a whole different episode. But what happens is, and maybe some of you listening have experienced this, where the people around you who love you the most say, oh, you don't do that. You could hurt yourself. You could die. You've never been to a different country. You're supposed to be taking care of yourself. You could have a heart attack if you jump in freezing cold water. People around us want to protect us, and we have got to stand our ground and trust what our body is telling us, and all will be well. If we listen to the fear, then we are in danger of holding on and constricting, and truly down the road making ourselves sick. And so if you are inspired by something, if you see something and your heart says, oh, we got to do that, trust it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. My extended family hosted me a big Indian baby shower over this past weekend, and we did this puja ceremony, which is this traditional blessing ceremony to protect the baby. And it was a lot of people, a lot of details, a lot of energy, and a lot of stress. And I could feel the family's kind of like, shallow breathing throughout the whole weekend, because there was a lot of tension in the space. And everyone kept telling me, don't be stressed, Beta, like calm down. It's going to be okay. And I kind of was chuckling throughout the weekend because I wasn't stressed at all. Not one bit. And I think it's because of this very thing that we're talking about, this idea that, when we quiet the external chatter of how other people want to protect us or what they think we need to do in order to protect the baby or take care of ourselves or stay calm, we can actually tune into what helps us quiet the chatter and tune in and stay calm. And, just like you, I hiked part of the Cinque Terre trail last month in Italy to celebrate my 40th birthday and really have this kind of coming of age experience as I walk into motherhood. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't even bring hiking shoes. I had white, no support, casual day sneakers that looked really cute.
Oh my gosh.
And it was brilliant. And I had an awesome time. And it's really this very conversation that is what helps me quiet the chatter and stay calm and not feel that anxiety, because I am nourishing myself in the way that
Mhm.
feels great and brings me a lot of joy. Like you can see my face lights up as I talk about this because it's true for me.
We have to be aware of those subtle energy shifts when we fail to listen to ourselves. If we begin to constrict in any way, or our stomach feels different, somebody says something to us, that is the real key to prospering, to evolving, is to honor that subtle shift. I call them micro recoveries.
Mm.
This is really what self-care is about, and not a big fan of that term, self-care. I think it's overused. But if we can say, yeah, I just did a little micro recovery right there. It reminds me of when we learned how to ride a bike. And when we're learning that and the bike starts to tip, we tend to overcorrect and crash. Those handlebars are very subtle. But when we learn that we can adjust our weight on the seat a little bit, you know, we could do that now. It's actually a great technique, is to squeeze your butt cheeks together to cue yourself in to pay attention. But if we can shift our weight, if we can slightly move those handlebars, it doesn't take much to take care of yourself, but it's the recognizing and making that micro recovery. You just, oh, no, I'm going to say no to that, because I felt that when I got invited to that party. I already am going to 3 different social events this week. I'm going to say no because I felt that one. Like, ooh, I even made a face, That's one of a great indicator for me. My kids always get frustrated with me because I do not have a poker face. And so when I feel something, it shows up on my face, and they can help me identify that. And that's a surefire sign that I need to say no.
So let's connect some dots here because, you know, we were going to talk about energy and neurodiversity and special ed. And I'm wondering how these dots connect for you. How is this conversation about energy a conversation about neurodiversity?
Mm. Well, my experience with ADHD started really early because I was always involved in the special ed organizations, CHAD and ADA and LDA, all these acronyms, but learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder. And it was round about the time when Ned Hollowell and John Rady wrote Driven to Distraction, which is one of the key books that were initially written on ADHD. And I was at a conference, and I was lucky enough to be sitting at a table with Sari Solden. Well, Sari wrote the book on women with ADHD, and she and I became fast friends. We had a daughter in common, and more importantly, our daughter's names. She had just adopted a daughter from Russia named Daria, and that is my firstborn's name, Daria.
Oh, wow.
And it was wild. We got to talking, and then I found out she lives in Michigan. And so for 20, almost 30 years now, Sari and I have had a friendship and a mentor-mentee relationship, and I've learned so much from her. And what I know is that especially women with ADHD feel so much of everything. They're aware of everything happening around them and so unaware of the internal. And when that happens, overwhelm sets in, and there's an absolute flip switch where the best way to protect themselves is to not do anything. And it looks like depression, it looks like laziness. If you've ever been called lazy, I'm here to tell you, you are not. Only the busiest, most vivacious people I've met have told me that they feel lazy. I, I, I know what it's like to feel all the feels. And there are things we can do to help manage our energy better. And whether that's therapy, coaching, medication, exercise, it's important to find what works because many people with ADHD are also highly sensitive people. And it's important to know that you're not alone and that there are so many ways to support yourself. You only have to do one thing.
So it sounds like through your work that you've really discovered that teaching and helping the folks and students and mentees that you work with to manage their energy is a really effective way in thriving in their neurodivergence.
Yes. And to bring it all around, the slowing down. I mean, the internal engine of a person with an ADHD brain. And I say ADHD because the latest DSM, that's what it's no longer ADD or ADHD. They've classified it as ADHD. So that's how I refer to it. But they often talk about the Ferrari brain and the, Ford brakes. Like it's easy to get caught up in the energy of ADHD. And what's important is to slow down. And this is how we know, like you referenced, this is how we know to listen to ourselves. When we're taking on everybody else's stuff, that overwhelm causes us to shut down. Whereas if we can figure out a way to micro-correct, micro-recover, and have a grounding practice where we can pay attention to what our body is telling us, because bodies never lie.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to slow down to do that. And it's counterintuitive when you have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
It's counterintuitive to slow down. You want to move.
Yeah. Ever since you and I first connected, I've been looking forward to this conversation because I have worked with many clients with ADHD over the years, many who were either diagnosed before coming to me or through our work together, they became curious and got tested. I've also partnered one of my former some of the people I've partnered with previously also experienced ADHD. And so, and I don't have ADHD, but I do have a very grounding energy. That's feedback that I receive a lot. And I know this to be true about myself. And so I'm interested in kind of how these partnerships work, right? Like how opposites attract and these kind of energies and contrasting compositions of humans with shared values, they kind of naturally or energetically come together. And so I'm just fascinated to hear. I'm fascinated to hear more about, how do we as coaches and friends and partners, how do we effectively support those we love and care for and partner with to slow down their energy when they're often, predispositioned to move and create and thrive and grow and scale and have big ideas so powerfully and so quickly. I mean, it's really kind of like a tornado of energy. When I've experienced this a lot with clients over the years, who just come up with these brilliant, amazing, beautiful business ideas. And I'm wondering how do we support them in creating that sustainability factor so they don't, experience a burnout instead.
One of the first, it's a great invitation. And if you are struggling with this as a partner, as a friend, or as a person with ADHD, the first thing we need to find out is, do you want the support? Do you want someone's help in this? And it can be as simple as, I recognize that I often spend the bulk of my time in the morning looking for things. You can see that that's frustrating for me, and I would like some support with it. How could we make it so that I can find all the things that I need, like my keys and my purse to get out of the door or whatever it is? So if the person is asking for help or you are ready to ask for help, start small and determine what it is that is the most frustrating thing for you. You know, we can find a landing zone for all your stuff. We can, create a basket where you just dump everything right by the door, make it easy on you. That's a simple strategy. A more complex one is, what do I do with all these ideas? How do I get moving on things? Because I have all these ideas, but I know I don't know how to do any of them, and I don't know what step to take. And well, that's why working with a coach is so wonderful. And I often use the tool of my Post-it in a Zoom call, which I've got up right now, to grab those ideas and put them in a safe place. Because many people with ADHD do things like talk fast, interrupt, look like they're distracted in conversation because they do not want to lose their thoughts. They do not want to forget what they're thinking right now, because what they're thinking is, this is so important, it's so good. And I know you're in the middle of a sentence, but I got to say this. So we interrupt. I say we. Side note, Kat, I was tested. I got tested in November. The irony here is that the doctor that I'm supposed to talk with, we were playing phone tag to talk about the results. So the jury's still out on me, which I think is so funny. But I figured if I was diagnosed, if they did find a diagnosis, I would think that I would have had this conversation already. But point being is, get permission to help first. Identify the most egregious thing that's going on, the most frustrating thing for them in their lives that they could get some help for. And then one of the easiest strategies is to move with your loved one to have a conversation. Please stop saying, let's sit and talk. Let's sit down and have a meal and discuss. Because
you mean physically move?
Physically move. You want to get the best out of your friend, your spouse, your partner, move. Play basketball, pickleball, tennis, go on a walk the dog, go on a hike, get side-by-side treadmills at the gym. That is how you're going to get the best out of your person. That is how you're going to really find out how you can be helpful. Because with ADHD and any neurodivergency, there's always this thing called comorbidity. It rarely stands alone. So you most likely have anxiety, depression, a learning disability. And I will tell you, the biggest learning disability, the most diagnosed learning disability is language, a language learning disability. So how we are receiving or producing language, whether that's audibly, written expression, language is a lot for many people with ADHD who are also diagnosed with a learning disability.
Tell me more what that means. What do you mean by that? Comorbidity and a language disability.
Yeah, well, the comorbidity means, thank you, there's something else going on. So my husband is a veterinarian, and he often talks about comorbidities in animals, but animals and humans were a lot alike. And there's always more going on than just the one thing when it comes to our neurology. And so the frustrating thing about a learning disability is you just can't see it. We don't have that clear part to our skulls like those clocks they used to make, where you could see how the clock worked and the gears and all that. That would be lovely, but we don't have access like that. And so a language learning disability, a learning disability, is when there's a discrepancy between your intelligence, and let's be real clear on this. People who are diagnosed with a neurodisability have average to above average intelligence. There are often many people who are gifted and have a learning disability. So it has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with performance. So you can be brilliant and still not quite understand how to run your dishwasher, or you can't do things like plan out your week on a calendar because it's just too much. But you can sit down at the piano and play Mozart, or you can read a book in a day and retain all of it. So it's the way that we process things, whether it's the way we hear things, the way we speak, the way we're writing. And learning disabilities can be in many areas. Language, math, movement, how we navigate the world. It's very complex.
It's so fascinating. And I really appreciate you mentioning the presence of a language disability, because something that I really appreciate as a coach is that it is a practice to understand our clients' style of communication and listening through the story or the ad lib or the detail to really get to the heart of the matter, to listen to the heart of what they're trying to communicate. And, I often hear from clients that they feel misunderstood, or they can't communicate or express what they want to say, or, people in my own life, they often get that feedback as well. And so I would love to hear more from you about how do those with a language disability or challenge or obstacle, how do they work through it for themselves? And then how do they partner with people who they don't just pay, like a coach who's trained to listen through, to really communicate effectively and to be understood? Because, I think that's one of the greatest sadnesses I have with clients around their communication challenges is they feel so often misunderstood.
And you know what, Kat, I really believe this is our need for immediacy. We are so used to having answers immediately. And the simplest way to navigate this challenge, I'm going to give one strategy: ask for time, processing time. So what does this sound like? Thank you for bringing that question up to me. I will have an answer for you by tomorrow morning at 8:00. Will that work? Sure. I understand that you'd like to know what the whole week plan is for our family, and I require a little bit of time to get into the multiple calendars for our children and myself. So let's plan to meet back here noon on Saturday to look at the week ahead, and I'll have the information ready. Advocating for yourself will give you the time and space you need to process what has just been brought to you. Because when we give answers immediately, it can end poorly. Overscheduling ourselves, over yesing, stressing ourselves out, double booking, triple booking. Has that ever happened to anybody? I once triple booked. Oops. And then, what we're doing when we learn how to advocate for our needs when it comes to using language is that we avoid the guilt, the shame, the frustration, the anxiety, the shutdown, the sickness, you name it. How does your stress show up in your life? We can avoid that by learning how to use our voice and ask for what we need. And this doesn't mean self-disclosing, you don't have to give all these reasons for why you need it, but it's no different than saying, I have diabetes. I have to take my insulin shot before I eat this thing or whatever. And nobody would question that. But yet somehow, or I need to go get my glasses so I can read this. Give me 5 minutes. Nobody would question that. What you're asking for is time for your brain to process. And so another way this looks is you go to your supervisor and say, I know we are meeting on Monday. Could I get the agenda on Friday so I have time to look at it before we meet? So getting it ahead of time so that you have time to process the written information, because you might come to that meeting then with 3 questions that you would not have been able to ask in the moment at the meeting on Monday.
Yeah, I really appreciate that response. And I hear just a couple layers at just the potency of asking for time for those of us who identify as people pleasers or givers or caretakers, because it's so often with that time and spaciousness and often physical separation, that we can tune into our own needs and not have them kind of out outspoken by everyone else's needs and expectations for us. Uh, and I'm also just present to the reminder that we train people what to expect from us.
Yes.
So if we've trained those we love in that they can expect an immediate response from us, and then we become frustrated or resentful or angry that we're always feeling that pressure to respond in a moment, we have to take stock and also just take a little responsibility for, we created that dynamic. We can recreate it. We
Exactly.
can retrain them in some other style or form of communicating.
I was just holding this up. I have this picture of an animated queen with her little scepter that is saying ping, and underneath it says make a new rule. This is our reminder that at any point in your life, day, hour, you can make a new rule for yourself.
Yeah.
We have the power to do that, folks. Do it.
And let it be fun.
Yes. Do it with a ping. Do it with a ping.
This has been such a really touching conversation, and something that strikes me is how personal it feels for you. This feels like such a really heart-centered, heart-focused topic for you, and I'm wondering why. Like, what's so personal about this for you?
When I was growing up, all the women in my life were people pleasing. I grew up in a time where at the family gatherings, it was expected that the men would be watching television or football or smoking their cigars or doing whatever together. And the women were in the kitchen, cleaning, cooking, tending to the children. And whenever they had the social going on, there was always it always looked like a painted smile, never really sincere. And on top of that, they were always trying to lose weight. The women in my life were always trying to lose weight and make themselves better, but they were doing it through smoking or, pills and the struggle. Like, I always wondered, what is it that you really want in your life? I wonder who I would be today had I had models of women who spoke their truth, who took action on their life, who did what they wanted to do. My mom went back to school after having 3 children to get her degree. Mm. And it was about that midlife time when I saw her reinventing herself and transitioning again and again and again. She went from raising children to getting her degree to becoming a working professional to becoming a world traveler to becoming a cancer survivor and then a widow and then an author. And it was hard on her heart, cancer mainly. And she just died last year from her congestive heart failure and some of the complications of her cancer almost 26 years earlier.
Wow.
And what I know is when we begin to live life on our terms, listening to our hearts and speaking what it is that we want, not worried about what anyone else thinks. We wouldn't worry what other people thought of us if we knew how little they thought of us. So I have been on a mission to break the patterns of heart disease in my family, both sides, by moving, by healthy eating, nourishing myself with first source foods. I do have a glass of wine occasionally, but I listen to what it is that my body wants. And that's what we do when we are on these walks and these adventures. When I am by myself and I am using my body to that degree, I have to listen to what it wants. And some of the best advice my mother ever gave me, anyone for that matter, and I'll end it with this: drink before you're thirsty, eat before you're hungry, rest before you're tired.
Mm-hmm. Cheers to that. That's beautiful. It makes me think of one of my favorite teachers of late. I've been doing a lot of work with Nicholas Ianni, and he's done a lot of work around purpose and healing kind of the intergenerational trauma that we hold in our bodies. And I took a seminar with him recently where he was providing a couple distinctions around how to discover whether you're in alignment with your purpose, and also the relationship between your purpose and your work. And he says that one of the key ingredients to ensure that we are being purposeful in this life, what it will require of us, is to care a lot less about what others think of us. And how simple, but how profound.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that is a real practice for thriving empaths, to care a lot less about what others think of us, to really embrace our own inner weird.
I love it. It's so true. It's so true. We spend so much of our life trying to fit in when really the key is to stand out.
Yeah. Well, Regina, you certainly stand out. I've so enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time. I always appreciate that when, from the first time I meet someone to when we record our interview, when that window is extended, it always makes the conversation that much more anticipated and worthwhile. So this has been a beautiful conversation. I appreciate you and the work you're doing.
And I appreciate you, Kat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.